to put on an event of this nature.
I must be just a little bit crazy to be here. I'm 71 years old. I should be doing something else. But I went to work for this railroad when I was 16. I was checking yard. I was a yard checker. And I worked in the shop on Saturdays or whenever I wasn't busy elsewhere. So I was born here in 1927, a year before the engine came here. It's kind of unique that the locomotive and I kind of survived together. Yeah. And we're spending our retirement years together. So I count that as a blessing.
But from Chehalis to Elbe is over 85 miles. The little used track is restricted to 10 miles per hour. Would Harold feel up to the trip? No need to ask twice. The 5 locomotive celebration was set. It is hard to describe the exhilaration experienced by the devoted railfan as he pursues a fascination with trains. Mount Rainier Scenic Railroad is one of the few places in North America where such a wide variety of steam locomotives can be seen operating in their natural habitat. Here would be an opportunity for one and all to experience and personally photograph dynamic railroad images that have otherwise slipped into history. The morning of the big event arrives, and although the sun is delaying an appearance, the photographers simply switch to the appropriate film type and begin firing away. For the first part of the event, the 2 rod engines, number 15 and number 17, will take the heavy passenger train 2.5 miles up the 1.5% grade to the siding at New Reliance. Number 15 is no stranger to Mount Rainier Scenic. Jack, Harold, and a support team rebuilt her up at the mineral shop with a Class 5 overhaul in 1989.
After fighting this thing up here for 100 miles and I'm not going to run it, no, I figured you drove something else. Yeah, right.
As this weekend is her first run of the season, little problems do crop up. Harold noted to Jack that her sanders had quit working. Sanders dump a small stream of sand on the rails right in front of the drivers to increase traction when the rails get slippery. It seemed no amount of subtle persuasion could get them going.
Well, we may have to get off of foot.
But there's no time to worry about that now. It's time to highball out of Elbe. Besides, Harold has an old railroader's trick up his sleeve. Hang on, we're not even yet at the steepest part of the grade.
There's a shovel in there. Get it out. We're gonna need it. Down here and start shoveling rock on the track. Hey, throw it under this wheel. That's the room. Another quarter mile, you gotta take. Another 100 yards. Make it.
Thanks to the young hostlers, the two-rod engines have conquered the grade. At the same time, back at Mineral, the three-geared engines have been preparing to leave for Elbe. Meanwhile, the train has reached New Orleans. The locomotives have run around the other end of the train for the return trip to Elbe. Arriving at Elbe, the train is greeted by the 3 geared engines. They are quickly coupled on ahead of the rod engines.
Well, 'cause the original plan was to set this black car and train over so they could leave with it. You were lying.
With 5 locomotives on the head end, this is Mount Rainier Scenic's very first quintuple header. With Shay number 11 on the point, we travel east toward Park Junction and the Nisqually River Bridge. Looking over the cab of number 15 is an incredibly rare experience. Reaching the bridge, this dream celebration is brought into beautiful perspective. The green passenger cars are Pullman commuter coaches that served up and down the West Coast on the Southern Pacific Railroad. They spent some of their retirement years at the old Oregon, Pacific, and Eastern at Cottage Grove. They were featured in a railfan motion picture favorite, Emperor of the North. A photographer's railfan special is an event that may appear rather odd to the uninitiated. In addition to riding the train, participants are dropped off at various points along the line. The train backs up and then goes charging past at full power, blowing whistles and making more smoke than is usually ever really necessary. Every photographer waits for just the right moment and then cranks off as many good shots as he can. Everyone quickly piles back onto the train to move down the line and probably do it all again. However, the casual observer needs to be aware. Once you catch a whiff of that locomotive smoke, it's hard not to become intoxicated with railfan fever. What train buff hasn't dreamed of packing up their cameras and somehow time traveling back to the 1930s or 40s for a day of serious rail fanning? We have taken the liberty of piecing together scenes from multiple locations to try and recreate just such an event. With several lumber companies and other operations in this neck of the woods, the following train activity could easily have occurred on this very same branch back in the days of the old Milwaukee Road.
Steam engines. Steam engines was always my love. I never got enough of them. I never ran enough of them, never fired enough of them when I was working. I can't tell you what the fascination is. My very earliest memories, I was a young kid. My dad used to take me on the helper engines, and I'd ride up on his lap fire in the old valleys, and running them, going to Portland with him got I hired out when I was only 16 years old. I lied about my age and went to work. Of course, I suppose it helped that my uncle was the master mechanic, but then
Help keep it secret.
And when I was little, even before I went to school, this engine caught my eye, and I could see this locomotive down in the valley from our house. I could tell them apart by their whistles. I'd have to climb up in an apple tree or something to see them, but anyway, this one was my favorite, and I followed it around like a puppy dog. I rode my bicycle and followed it around town. They used to do quite a bit of switching here in Chehalis.
I saw it as a kid. I grew up in Steilacoom for the first 5 years of my life. Right across the street was an embankment and the Northern Pacific main line. And we're still running steam locomotives there for a few years, and I was mesmerized by them. When we moved out of Steilacoom, we moved closer to Tacoma and still had the vantage point of looking over the main line. And all I could hear the locomotives whistling for the crossing about a mile away. And I'd hear a diesel horn, and a diesel horn, and a diesel horn. And one day I heard steam again, and ran over to the bank and looked out, and that was the last steam engine that Northern Pacific ran. It was the 1776, a nice Mikado. And that was all. So I've had this love affair with steam ever since.
Yeah, my father, he worked for many years up on the Northern Pacific. Dad and Granddad both. He hired out for Jim Hill in St. Paul, and he was one of Jim Hill's construction engineers. He worked all the way across the country, and he settled in Delta, Everett, and he retired there in, 1935, I think it was, on the old Jim Hill pension. My dad went to work the first day of January 1910. And I went to work 10th day of September of 42, and my son went to work the 18th of May of 74, so we've got a fair amount of seniority built up over the years.
It became a lot of fun. After a while, I think I would have paid the Northern Pacific to work over there. I worked almost every weekend while I was going to school. I could get in 5 days on a weekend if I really worked at it hard, including with time and a half. You see.
Oh, sure.
So I was making pretty good money, 56 cents an hour. Man, that was great. And 59 when you work nights. So I bought a lot of savings bonds during the war, and that's what my wife and I got married on. I mean, we used those saving bonds for our nest egg, and all thanks to the Northern Pacific and the Cowles, Chehalis, and Cascade.
Although not well known, Mount Rainier Scenic has a fine collection of vintage diesel power as well. As a bonus for the rail fans, a classic F9 makes an exciting appearance in her original Northern Pacific freight engine colors.
Diesels are funny. Which is cheaper to operate? A diesel locomotive, an old one. All our engines are 50 years old or older, except for the F9. She was built in 56. When a part on a diesel locomotive fails, you either need to have a pretty good parts supply or a derelict locomotive to rob from, or you spend big money locating the part somewhere in the United States. When a part on a steam locomotive breaks down, you shrug your shoulders and you go to work in the machine shop and carve one out of brass or iron and put it on. The expense of repairing a diesel can be more expensive than repairing a steam locomotive. So it's kind of a toss-up there.
This will be the last appearances of number 10 and number 91 for some time. They are both due for the FRA's new 15-year boiler work.
It's a big job, especially for a geared locomotive when you're only going to use it a few days a year. It's a real big investment.
Mount Rainier Scenic, with its growing collection of historically significant equipment, is still a young, vital, and important organization with enormous potential.
This boiler here, yeah, this is Skookum's boiler. The first logging Mallee built a 2442. I'm afraid we have four locomotives. Skookum here, number 70, a Rainier Mikado, is sitting on the ground in pieces over there. Number 3, a little 24-ton standard gauge Shay, is sitting in a couple piles over there. Heisler number 10, the first successful 3-truck Heisler ever built. We just purchased 2 more of them that are on display closer to Mount Rainier National Park, a couple of 2-truck locomotives. So we're the valley of the Heislers around here, like it or not. And then 45, our newest entrant, is those are all awaiting restoration, which simply means money and time.
As to what locomotive will be restored next, only time will tell. But we can be sure of one thing. Like all other restorations from Mount Rainier Scenic, it will be really something to see.
This is a dream come true, really. I've always wanted to operate steam locomotives, and what better place to do it than here.